I majored in Russian studies at Brown. So I did a lot of writing and took a lot of literature classes, but I majored in Russian studies. I had started Russian in high school. My French teacher also taught Russian, and I'm the third of 3 girls, and I was tired of everything I did someone had done before. So I took Russian because like no one had done that, and I loved it. And through that teacher, I was exposed to Russian literature and history and culture. So I just kept doing it. And at Brown, there are no requirements until you choose a major. And I was taking all these Russian-related classes because I just liked them. And I realized, oh, I pretty much have a major in this. So I majored in that, and then I had the freedom to take more writing and literature classes. So I studied in Moscow one summer during college, 1983, Soviet Union. And then I worked as a tour guide after college a couple times, taking American tourists around with in-tourist guide, doing most of the work. I was just there for comfort for the tourists, which is kind of ironic because I was like 22 years old. I don't know what comfort I gave them. And then after I was working at a newspaper in Florida was when the Soviet Union collapsed, and I thought, what am I doing in Florida when I could be in Russia? So I had heard about a magazine that was started by a Dutch guy in Moscow. It was a joint venture with the Union of Journalists, and he modeled it after New York Magazine. It was an English language city magazine for the very new expat community. And I offered my services cheap. I said, I speak Russian, and I'm a journalist, and I'll come work for you. So I went there for 4 or 5 months, and then I came back and I was getting married, and about a week before my wedding, the man who started the magazine decided to start an English language daily newspaper called the Moscow Times, and he faxed me a letter saying, why don't you and Steve, your soon-to-be husband, who's also a journalist, come and help me start this paper. Steve is a business journalist, so he was the first business editor, and I was the features editor of the Moscow Times. And we moved there in '92 with the agreement that we'd go for a year, and then I'd go where Steve wanted to go, because he didn't have a particular interest in going to Russia, but I convinced him. And we stayed there 2 years for the Moscow Times, and then Steve was looking for jobs, and we decided to come home and just both look for jobs. And literally the day before we were leaving Moscow, the Wall Street Journal in Moscow offered him a job. So instead of going home, we went home on vacation, and 2 weeks later we went back to Moscow and stayed another 4 years. So we were there from '92 to '98.